Hello and welcome to Season 3 of the Vedic Conversation, where each episode we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but a still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Anthony Thompson, a Vedic meditation teacher based in London, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Rory Kinsella in Sydney and Derrick Yanford in New York. In this episode, we decided to ask each other some questions and give our responses too. The topics range from what has been revealed over the past year and what we're looking forward to, asking is spirituality required to meditate, and what we tell our students to do but don't do ourselves. It's candid and revealing, and I'm sure you'll find this episode interesting. Let's get into the conversation. And don't forget to stick around until the end, where we'll share with you how you can become involved in the conversation. Okay, we're going to start again. What have you missed the most during the past year? And what is the greatest revelation you've experienced?
Are you asking anyone in particular?
Well, Derrick, why don't you go first?
I'll go first. Okay. When you asked the question, I think the first thing that came to mind for me, so I'll go with that, is when I lived in New York full time, I enjoyed going out to restaurants because, there's so many to choose from. The ambiance is different, great food, and it just became something not that I took for granted, but I spent a lot of money going out, meeting friends, trying new places. I love sushi. There's some places that I used to love going to over and over. There's a really cute place in my neighborhood that I'd love to go for breakfast. And so I think going out, I was going to say like seeing people, but I think it's even more driven by the food, like going out and just having great food, which could lead to being with people and meeting new people or whatnot. But yeah, and even I think, in New York too, the thing is, if you don't go out to eat, it's very easy to order from a restaurant. So you can change it up for a month at a time. And it's just a couple buttons on your phone, food from your favorite restaurant shows up. And so dining and having that access to restaurants for me is probably the thing I miss the most, because that's a desire that comes up that I'm like, oh yeah, can't go out really. So I would say going out and eating at my favorite restaurants and exploring new ones.
I'm interested. Do you have sushi for breakfast?
I've had leftover sushi for breakfast.
Wow. That doesn't sound appetizing.
Okay, so this is the thing with sushi, right?
Curled up at the edges, is it?
I actually don't enjoy, for the most part, takeout sushi or sushi delivered, because I'm kind of the opinion that kind of cuisine is something you sit down and eat and have brought to you, and I don't usually take it home either, because it's just not whatever. But as the pandemic happened, when you have a craving for sushi and there's a place that's going to deliver it to you, you get it. And after having done that a few times, you're like, oh, it's already, here. Now you're going to put it, you're not throwing it out, you're putting it in the refrigerator. It's not going to stay really well. So now it's in the morning. Now, okay, eat it for sushi, eat it for breakfast and whatnot. So it's not anything that I normally practice, but one of the things I think I have incorporated since the pandemic happened. As far as a revelation, this is so interesting that you asked the question, because I would say I just had this revelation last week, and it was probably prompted by an artist that I just came across maybe a few weeks before. She's from Israel. Her name is Noga Erez. I'd never heard of her before. She's kind of indie pop. She collaborates with her partner her music is really interesting, vocally, musically, rhythmically. And I was listening to her once, and I was sitting in my studio, and the way that I used to work as a choreographer, I haven't really done that. I haven't really been in spaces where I'm with dancers or whatnot. All of this movement was just like flooding in. And I recognized how much I missed creating and working with dancers. And I was really, really inspired to the point where I bought 2 tickets to her live online event. That was amazing. And the day of the concert, it was Tuesday, I think that the 1st of April. I watched it, and as I was watching it, I got up and I started to improv on my own. And that was kind of because earlier in that day, I had a Reiki treatment with a woman who I've just reconnected with. And I don't know what she does or how it works because she does it remotely, but there's like energy that's moving through my body. And afterwards, she always says, you know, I'm recognizing that you're doing a lot of sitting and that you need to start adding movement back into your life. You need to do some circular movement or whatnot. So she's been telling me that for a couple of weeks, and I've kind of been like, whatever. And I just decided with this artist, with this music, to get up, and I started to move around. And I mean, was it great? I don't even know, but I felt amazing. And to be 45 years old, to have been in the arts and dance for as long as I have, it took the pandemic and me not dancing and being around people to get up and move my body and move in a way and dance for myself and recognize for the first time, I don't need to dance to be good at anything. But when I move my body, the way that it makes me feel is amazing. And I've never taken a dance class in that manner for myself, just for the sake of moving. It's always been to increase my ability or to perform or to somehow work on the skill. And, you know, I'm at Ree's retreat center right now, and I told him, I said, oh my God, I improv'd and it felt so good because it's like, why don't you dance? And I'm just like, oh, I don't feel like it. I'm not, whatever. And I was like, I just moved and it felt so amazing. And I just realized that's why people love dancing. You don't have to be excellent at dancing. You just, when you move your body, you can have this amazing experience. And I never did that. And not to say that when I've moved my body in the past, it didn't bring me joy. It did. And I always, working at my craft brought me joy. And so I got addicted to that part of it. But in having been away from it for so long, kind of thinking I can't really do it anymore, then listening to this artist who I just stumbled across, who kind of got me geared up again. I mean, and I think I would say I got up and I was improvising, and it wasn't until I was halfway through that I was like, oh my God, what are you doing? And then I just kept doing it. And I was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You were really doing something for yourself. Yeah, unlocking something that you tucked away for a little while.
Yeah, it's been really, really interesting experience.
Beautiful. Rory, what have you missed the most during the past year? And what's the greatest revelation you've experienced?
Mine's going to be quite obvious, the one that I've missed. So yeah, travel I've missed the most. We've been so lucky here in Australia that many things haven't changed. Like listening to Derrick talk about not being able to go out to restaurants, we can still go to all our restaurants. It doesn't really seem to be much different. But obviously, yeah, foreign travel, we're not in Australia. We're not allowed to leave the country for non-essential reasons. Even with quarantine, you're not allowed. So yeah, that was a big one. And we went away 2 weeks ago, and this leads into a bit of a revelation. We went to North Queensland to the rainforest near above Cairns and above Port Douglas, and it was great. And it seemed really foreign, and you know, we're allowed domestic travel here, as I think, you know, many places are. And you know, Australia is such a big country. This was a 3-hour flight away, and it's completely different. We were like, we're in Bali, like it was tropical hot. There's big spiders everywhere. There's crocodiles. it's a completely different place. And so there was a bit of a revelation in there's a lot of stuff near us, doesn't involve us crossing international borders, that's there to be explored. And I guess, yeah, that links into to some of the other revelations in it. One, that there's lots of stuff near you that you haven't explored anyway. I guess, you know, like Derrick's restaurants in New York, you could keep going forever without repeating yourself. And I guess the other key one is how much we've been able to do online, and knowing that some things you can do online and some things you can't. And, you know, even within the Vedic meditation teacher community, we've come up against this wall of you cannot teach Vedic meditation online and call it Vedic meditation. That's a no-no. We won't go into the details of why, but there are lots of things you can do. Like, as soon as the pandemic hit, started doing my group meds, weekly group med on Zoom, and it's more consistent and more popular than it ever was. It's just like, okay, well, this is just easy for my students. It's a hassle for them to get to a certain place at 6:30 on a Wednesday night, but for Zoom, easy, just get on. So that's been really good. Doing one-on-one coaching sessions online opens up students all around the world to do that with, and it makes it, rather than both of us having to travel half an hour or an hour to get somewhere to then do it and then come back, it's just log on, do it. You can fit more of these things in. You can do it with people further away. I mentioned this before, but we've been having family Zoom chats every week, which has been amazing. We're still doing it. You know, we've done it every week for over a year now. And because the clocks have just changed, I'm now like, oh, do we have to do it at 6 a.m. my time? But that's just been so good, you know. And same with work, like with my day job, realizing how much of it you can do remotely without having to slog it through rush hour traffic there and back every day. So I think the whole work-life balance thing, and realizing which things you should do in person and which you won't. They'll definitely blend in the future so that we're not kind of slavishly doing things in person that we were doing before. So I think that's been the key thing for me, which, you know, lots of people would have noticed that, but I've really appreciated that. And as a couple, Susie and I, you know, we're not big partiers or going out people. We're kind of quite homebods anyway, so it's like, oh, we get to be more homebodies. It's kind of allowed. So that's been kind of good for us. And what about you, Anthony?
Okay, I think the thing that I've missed the most in the last year is live interaction with art or the arts. As you know, I used to work in the art world. I was in that for over 30 years, and I'm still sort of involved on the peripheries. So going to exhibitions, going to museums was something that I did frequently in a week. I'd see all the major exhibitions in London, and would go to sale rooms, and I'd go to art shows that were on in galleries, and I'd go and see things that I thought. I've always taken the approach, a sort of open-minded approach, that even if it's the work by an artist that I don't really like, I'll still go, because I want to see if my approach has changed, and whether, sometimes there are works of art that are in the show that you've never seen before, and they're really very good, and perhaps previous works I've seen have been mediocre. So I'm always sort of going with the possibility that I could change my mind about what I think about that particular artist. And so that's with the visual, with the visual arts. With the performing arts, I really miss live music, particularly classical music and opera and ballet, which are very expensive things to do in London, but of the very highest quality. And so those are always treats. And my partner Sarah and I, we are very judicious about what we go and see. She knows a lot more about dance and music than I do, and I defer to her judgment as to which particular production is the one worth going to look at. But it's just sitting in an audience and having live music being played in front of you. I have, in the early part of the lockdown, I was watching performances, streamed by all the big houses and the orchestras, and it worked up to a point, and then it becomes very flat, and you don't get the richness of the experience of sitting in an auditorium. So those are things that I've really missed, and really look forward to going back to, as well as restaurants, because usually if I went out to an art show or to an opera or classical concert, then there'd probably be a meal involved as well. But yeah, so good food. Like Derrick, in London, we can order in. We've got great takeaway services, Deliveroo and Uber Eats, which will serve serve lots of different restaurants and lots of different cuisines. So that's satisfied. I think the greatest revelation, I think there are two. One is personal, one is general. On a personal level, I found that I had a capacity to work longer hours, more intensely, and to really get stuck into studying. And I've always been a bit of a bookworm and sort of interested in the background to things. So I've enjoyed that and enjoyed having the time and the uninterrupted time to do that. And I think on a general level, the biggest revelation has been how many people have shown extraordinary kindness and compassion to others who are less fortunate than themselves. Not necessarily those people who have been made ill by COVID, but those who are struggling perhaps to feed themselves, who have lost their jobs and so on and so forth. And there have been extraordinary stories of people really going out of their way to help those that are less fortunate. And surprise, people that you wouldn't think would do that in my neighborhood, friends, people I know, really, really extraordinarily impressive. People have been putting themselves out. And also, I think the resilience that some people have had, together with the vulnerability that, some people you think would have the innate strength and stability to kind of deal with something like this. And no, they've had major wobbles, and the reverse, people you might have thought would suffer terribly haven't. They've actually almost thrived. And I can think of one instance where somebody who I know who suffers from ADHD finds normal life quite challenging because everybody else seems to be coping. And yet during lockdown, he thrived because everybody was kind of brought down to his level, and were having mental challenges, which he recognized. And he kind of felt that he could connect with more people in this kind of environment than he could before. So I think there have been all sorts of things like that which have just kind of percolated to the surface and been interesting to witness.
It was going back to the art. My little sister lives in Paris, and she was saying that at the beginning of lockdown, it was great because all the public kind of exhibits stayed open, but there was no one in them. So she was saying she could just wander around the Louvre with no one in it, and it was just amazing. But then they caught up with everyone else, closed them all. But she said there was a period of a couple of weeks where they were all open with no one in, which was just magical.
I also heard in Paris that there was a secret restaurant that was open. It's been open during the whole of the lockdown, and I think it could seat about 90 people, and they were all sort of sworn to secrecy, but of course it got out. But
They don't like to
you know.
follow the rules in Paris.
Oh yeah, why not? Why not?
Okay, I have a question. So we'll give this one to Derrick first. This is a question I've been wanting to ask for a while. So, what is a piece of meditation advice that you give but don't follow?
Interesting question. And I've actually thought about this for a while because I know, the whole idea of embodying the practice and, a little bit, I think as a teacher anyway, as a dance teacher, do as I say, not as I do kind of a thing. Or what I am expressing is for students and not for me. But I guess the thing that I've come to that I tell my students to do that I don't do is to schedule your second meditation or to put them into your diary or into your calendar so that you will not forget it and you have a reminder. And as a way to, you may have a list of meetings that you have for this person or that person. Where is the time that you've actually scheduled for yourself? And make that a priority and make it important. And if you have to reschedule it, push it up, push it back, wherever, but don't let it come off. I used to do that for myself. I don't do it anymore. And I mean, it's funny because there are afternoons where I don't do it. Like I forgot the other day. It completely, the end of the day had come or the next day had come and I'm like, oh, I didn't do it. Maybe if it was in my calendar, I would have done it kind of a thing. But I think what's interesting about that for me and having that experience is I still give that suggestion to my students. And I think in the beginning when I first started teaching, I was very adamant about the 20 minutes twice a day. This is it. Like kind of in a way, maybe kind of being a purist because I felt like my teacher was kind of a purist. The way that it was unfolded to me and how I heard other teachers talk about it was a little bit looser. And I was kind of like, I don't know how I feel about that. And now that I don't do that thing and that I do miss, I'm almost a little bit more like, this is a great suggestion, but also be aware that if you miss and if you don't do it and if you cancel it or if it does get moved, don't feel bad about it either. And so I think my ability to let myself off the hook has allowed me to be more compassionate with my students and my presentation because I'm a human being, and I'm going to miss as well, And so now that I can kind of relay that to my students without having to feel like I should be the pristine example, I never miss, and that's not realistic for me. And so I think it makes me more human, more approachable. And yeah, I don't know if I'll get to the point where I stop recommending it, but I definitely, in the beginning too, I think it's important that it is a helpful tool. But if you then do become consistent and you want to remove it, remove it. But I definitely do say, schedule your afternoon meditation, and I do not do that.
I think it's great to be relatable though, and it's really important not to have this so strict approach because I had this where I would feel guilty if I didn't do it, and it's crazy to have like a relaxation practice that adds guilt
right
into your life. But those little bits that make you relatable, because I remember I've started saying that, in my classes I say that my morning meditations are always thought filled, after having done it every day for 7 or 8 years. And people are like, what? And it's a really good way of showing that, thoughts are okay. That's what we say constantly. But it's letting people know that even after doing this for many years, you'll still get thoughts. So I think those bits where you make yourself real and talk about your genuine experience, it really helps people see that it's not just a trick and you're not just saying it and they're supposed to master it by day 4 and be, zen, no thoughts. It's like, no, it's just a way of coming back from your thoughts. It's not getting rid of them. So yeah, I applaud you with your
thank you.
missing them. Anthony?
Yeah, I do schedule, especially if I kind of look into the week ahead, and if I see I've got a really tough day, then that second one is definitely booked in. And sometimes, I do it at a different time than the one that's scheduled. And again, I mean, I absolutely, I think, Rory, the point you make about, not getting stressed about your meditation is really key. I mean, we don't want to get worked up about this. We want to take this in a very relaxed state, very nonchalant, sort of quite laid back about it. I think the one thing that probably I consistently tell students to do but don't do myself is take enough time coming out at the end of the meditation. So there was a period about 7-8 years ago when I got really manic in my meditation. I really wanted it to end quickly. It was like, I'd be clock watching. Oh, no, another 3 minutes. Oh, for goodness sake, come on, another 2 minutes. I thought I'd overrun it. You mean I got another 2 minutes to go? Yikes, and I'd be sort of almost drumming my feet. And then, then it was like 20 minutes, yay! And, was I going to actually jump up and out of the chair and get going? No, I knew I had to sort of sit still for a little while, but it really was a little while. It wasn't 2 minutes, it wasn't 3 minutes. Then I go rushing off. And it was kind of really odd. And I spoke to several people about it, and they said, no, this is just a phase. There was some sort of mania and boredom that I had way back in the past, which was just kind of being released at that particular moment. And, I think experiences in meditation, I share those with my students quite a lot. I mean, another one, we often talk about sometimes having the feelings of fear, anger, sadness, mania, or boredom within the meditation, or perhaps after the meditation, that is a kind of residue. And I remember, 5 years ago, meditating and then just noticing that my cheeks were wet and I was crying. I wasn't weeping. I wasn't sort of sobbing. I was just very gently weeping. I thought, well, that's very odd. I wasn't conscious of any sad thoughts that I had at that particular moment. It just happened. And it happened about 3 or 4 times over a period of a couple of weeks. And, it just happened. And there we are. There was some old sadness that came out. But I think the most consistent thing is that, it's definitely 2 minutes and not 3 minutes at the end of the meditation. And why do I do that? I think it's because it's not that I've definitely got something to do that I feel sort of pressurized in. I've got to rush on to the next appointment, or there's something I have to deal with. It's just I feel okay doing that. And I think, this is the other thing too. It's a recommendation to take 2 to 3 minutes coming out. The only rule we have in Vedic meditation is don't try to meditate. Everything else is a suggestion. Everything else comes from our experience, the experience of our colleagues, our teachers, our students. And we're pooling all that information together. And, we're talking about a lot of information which is available to the student. And, I always say to people, this is your meditation. You know how to do it. I've taught you how to do it. You know what to do. You've proved to me and to yourself that you know how to do it. Now what you've got to do is take that and adapt it and put it into your lifestyle. And, sometimes your meditation may be a little bit shorter. Maybe it'll be a little bit longer. Maybe it'll be 2 minutes. Maybe it'll be 3. But as Rory says, just stay relaxed and fluid and nimble. And, when we start getting rigid and become sort of like a zealot about it, overly zealous, that's when things start to crack and fall apart, and you get yourself in a bit of a pickle.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So my bit of advice that I give but don't follow is, and I'm not sure, this was something that I was told, I don't know if you guys say it as well, but not, if you have a good idea during meditation, not to come out and write a note, but to just let it percolate, go a bit closer to the field of being, and a better idea will come out. When I was taught this, I was given the example of there was one exception to that rule, and that was John Lennon at Maharishi's ashram in in Rishikesh in 1968 when they were writing, Abbey Road or the White Album or whatever it was. And if you weren't John Lennon, then just don't come out and write notes. So I break that one. Not
So you waking up and sort of writing out a couple of special chords, or
no. So I'll just a little reminder. I'll just be like, oh, and I'll just put it quickly in my phone. Just remember to do that, which I do tell people not to do.
Like you still do that? Like you currently?
Yeah, I'm doing it now. No, I'll probably do it maybe once or twice a week. I'll just do it.
So my question is, that thing that you write down, do you revisit it afterwards, and does it have the same potency it had during meditation?
I mean, it's not necessarily just a great idea. It might just be a reminder to do something. But, I generally say, look, whatever comes up in meditation, you'll remember it afterwards if it's important to remember.
Right.
So that you don't interrupt your thing. And, yeah, my admission, my confession to the Vedic Conversation community is that I sometimes break that one. And the other one that I sometimes do is...
we got a list.
So I say, don't wear headphones. Noise is no barrier to meditation, but I do break that on aeroplanes, where I'll put my noise cancelling headphones on, not with music or anything, but I'll keep them on. But yeah, I think that one's okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's all part of adapting to the environment. I think that the most difficult place I ever tried to meditate was next to a motor racing circuit when there was a motor race going on. So there was all this wow, 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 wow as they all came past. And I did have some earplugs, but they weren't effective enough. But yeah, Rory, like you, I use noise cancelling on a plane. It's a great help. Just kind of puts you in a different little bit of a different space,
different little world.
I feel like we could maybe have a whole episode around that, because I want to dig a little deeper to see if there are more things that I say that I'm not aware of, that I say that I'm not actually doing.
Yeah, well, we can do a part 2.
Yeah, because I want to hear more.
So let's meditate on that, and if we get some good ideas, we come out, put them in our phone.
Come out, walk around for 10 minutes, make a few phone calls, and then go back and
get back into meditation. Yeah, there you go. Hey, Derrick, I've got a great...
mid-meditation, gotta go.
I mean, I have to be honest. I've never done that. I've never felt
but now I've planted the seed.
Yeah, so I'm curious. But I definitely have maybe entertained a thought longer than I should have. But the thing that I do recognize, that's why I asked you, is it's never as charming after I'm done. I might have it again in another meditation, but whatever it is about that brilliance of it seems to be brilliant inside the meditation, not so much outside. So I haven't had the inclination to go, oh, let's jot it down. But maybe, I'll try. I think that's the thing. When you hear stories like that, what your colleagues are doing or your students are doing, I think it can inspire you to experiment. This is our life. This is my life. I want to experience it to the fullest I can. And I think what that means sometimes is breaking my own rules that I make and see how I feel about that and what does it inform, So I'm a human being.
That's an interesting one you mentioned there, Derrick. Entertaining a thought when you have remembered that you're supposed to be thinking a mantra. That's another one.
Yeah.
I don't do that often, but sometimes.
It happens.
Yeah, there are seductive thoughts that kind of charm you to hang around a little bit longer and indulge in them. But do you ever find sometimes there are thoughts that you have in the meditation which, pretty groovy, they're kind of good, you're kind of excited about them, but then you leave it alone. You don't come out of your meditation, write it down, but it's just been there. And then quite some time later, you're doing something, and then you realize that what you've done or what you've what's come about has been informed by that previous interesting thought, that has been a contributor to what's going on. That it's not like, okay, I've got this great idea, for a song, and here's the song title or dance, and this is the choreography. But later you're maybe writing a song or putting a dance together, and you just then become aware that that previous quite good idea has kind of come in and shaped what you're doing now. There's a bit of a delayed reaction, and it's not so obvious, but it is definitely making a contribution. Have you ever sort of had that feeling or experience?
I don't know if I can say directly in that way. I don't know that I would make the connection, because I would say during my meditation, I'm quite unaware. I don't have a lot of awareness. So what I recognize is whatever thought is charming that I want to entertain longer than I should is charming because of all of the other noise that I'm not aware of. And so when I go back into the waking state, all that noise is back. And so either I can't find it, or it doesn't make its way to the surface of my awareness, because there's something outside of me that I'm more intrigued about. But I would say, if anything, maybe I recognize coincidences a bit more, or which I know are not coincidences, my ability to recognize things that have always been there and make a correlation between the two. Like yesterday, I was watching a documentary about Ernest Hemingway, which is not something I would do. And they were talking about James Joyce and how he, at that time, was the king of literature. This morning, I had a session with my therapist, and he was talking about James Joyce. And I was like, really? Just 12 hours ago? I mean, I don't read. I mean, I've not read anything by Ernest Hemingway. And here it is coming up. So those kinds of things, but those happen a lot now, and so I'm not even taken by it anymore. But I don't know if that's also because of, in the waking state, I'm more aware of making those kinds of connections. Yeah, I'm not sure. It's a good question, though.
Yeah, I guess if it's not a direct lift of an idea from meditation to the outside world, for me it's quite hard to tell, because meditation becomes such a significant amount of my daily thinking time that it could well be anything that does, it's a fair chunk of free thought time, not engaged when you're answering emails or watching TV. That as a I haven't worked it out, but as a percentage of free thinking time in a day, it would be high. So yeah, there's probably a lot of stuff which has come from that thinking time that maybe doesn't get the credit for it, but because it's such a long time, because I'm not going for hour-long walks, and I've got into a habit of listening to audiobooks on my run, which takes out that as a free thinking time. But
I think inevitably, the more connected we are with the outside world, the more we see that there isn't actually any difference, then those ideas are just going to be flowing there, and they're just subliminally there. I think that's probably what's happening, and it's not like, oh yeah, this is an idea I had 3 weeks ago. It's not going to be as crude and as obvious as that. It's going to be very subtle. But yeah.
Okay, I'm teetering between two questions, and I think I'm going to go with the first one and leave the second one for later. And so I'm going to ask the question maybe, and then give a little context around it, which is, do you think that it's possible to have an active sexual life and be a prominent spiritual leader? To be having both of those things going on simultaneously? And I ask that because I would say when we look at religion or monks or priests or people who are in the higher echelon of a spiritual practice, and informed a little bit from the episode we did with Jenny of coming out of the spiritual closet, and that term is something that I don't really use. I'm still trying to understand what is spirituality, does it mean? What I notice is it seems like those two things have to be separated to some degree. If you are the head of a religious movement or spiritual movement, or you're a spiritual being, a saint or whatnot, it doesn't seem as though engaging in sexual activity is either allowed or, it's frowned upon. It's kind of taboo. So do you think you can have both, or should they be separated? And I will go to Anthony first.
I think you definitely can have both. I think part of when we think in the West of spiritual, I'm putting that in inverted commas, people who are celibate, there's often quite a lot of hypocrisy in surrounding that. There are many, many instances of popes with children, and of monks and nuns having sexual relationships. And I think a lot of the kind of ideas behind it are fear-based. That you, in order to be a Dominican or a Franciscan or a Benedictine monk, you must be celibate. And it's part of the kind of fear-based administration that, keeping people in line, keeping them focused on their devotions, and not being led astray. But, it's inhuman in the sense that all humans want physical and intimate contact. Now, some people may find that challenging and difficult for a number of reasons. But generally speaking, intimacy and sexual intimacy is something that we all like, and we're all, in a sense, programmed to want. And to have somebody say, you can't do this, puts up an immense barrier and a strain. And I just think it's incredibly unhealthy. I think you can be spiritual and have an active sexual life. You may find that what interests you, and maybe if you're having multiple partners, you may find that that's perhaps not so interesting. That it's the charm of that perhaps diminishes, and so you may find that you would prefer to be with one person, and because then you can give the full attention, and what you're recognizing perhaps in that person is yourself. It's a reflection of yourself. And I think sometimes there's certainly been cases in this country where there have been more cases of sexually transmitted diseases amongst over 55-year-olds than ever before, because these are people who are divorced and they're now back on the scene and they're having a good time. They're making up for lost time. I think you can definitely be spiritual and have an active sexual life. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think this falls into our normal categorization of householders versus monks, where Anthony said all of us. We could qualify that and say most of us have these desires. There's very quite a few things recently about asexual people. So yeah, we could have asexual people. We can have monks who don't have those desires. I think when Tom Knowles talks about this or quotes Maharishi, he says, renunciates. They don't have to kind of give up sex. It's not they're not giving it up. They're just not interested in that. Like Gurudev wasn't interested in that. It wasn't like he said, "No, I'm going to not do this." It's not like I'm suppressing a desire that I have. I just don't have that desire. So, yeah. So it's important that if you do have those desires, to think carefully about what you want to do with them and not suppress them. for the sake of it. But yeah, then there's another difference that I think Anthony was talking about with whether, because when we see sexually active spiritual leaders, it's often not just they're sexually active, but they're promiscuous, and then they're kind of hurting people or abusing their power to do it. And you know, we watched the Bikram documentary last year, which is a kind of key, and it's so funny about that one because he's walking around in his undies kind of strutting about, and there's that difference between being a normal, maybe the difference between like an Anglican priest and a Catholic one, where the Anglican might be getting married if they want to, whereas the Catholic can't. There's a difference between normal sexual relations and abusing your power in a position of authority and mixing that. It's like we as teachers of anything have this kind of rule of not to have relationships with students because it's when you mix sex and power, I guess it gets dangerous, and that's why you can't have it in workplaces and why it's a big scandal when it comes out we're having lots of sex scandals in politics here in Australia at the moment, and it's mixing those things where it becomes dangerous. But it's not incompatible, it's just how you making sure that it's not tied in with you're not using your position to kind of get anything out of people, and there's not that imbalanced power dynamic. But the householder versus monk thing, we're householders, we're proudly so from a Vedic meditation perspective, it's not incompatible, but being wary of using that position. And as Anthony said, as you progress spiritually, you're less likely to want to do that because you'll be more aware of the effect it will have on other people.
Interesting. So I think the takeaway from both of you, I think what you said, Rory, about scandal, the scandalous part of it, and I agree, as a teacher, it's important that you have a teacher-student relationship, and having a sexual relationship with a student is inappropriate. That if you want to go down that route, then you need to relinquish being their teacher because of the power dynamic that's involved. And I think there's already this idea, kind of like what you were saying, Anthony, too, is that maybe the more spiritual you become, the less interested in sex you might have. Just like monks or renunciates already, they are not interested in that, and so they're not participating in relationships in that way. So when I think about spiritual leadership, and either those who are religious leaders of institutions of Christianity or whatever it might be, or Buddhism or whatnot, what I hear from those people is this kind of veiled shame over engaging in sex in a variety of ways, especially being homosexual, right? Somehow that kind of sex, and with statements that the Pope has made recently about how he can't bless that union because it's a sin and all these kinds of things. So certain kinds of sex is okay, other kind of sex is not okay. You know what I mean? And I'm like, the question comes from, what is the big deal? Why is there this thing about that? And so even in my quest to understand what is spirituality versus religion, I think in some ways what I'm coming to understand is spirituality is a way of saying your own understanding of the universe, its laws, how it works, and your relationship to it, how you relate to it, versus the collective of how men have described and written down what the relationship is and how it works. It's your kind of your own path. And I've been watching some documentaries about with the Dalai Lama, who I respect. But I've also heard him say, if you're going to involve yourself in gay sex, you cannot be a monk. You can have sex, heterosexual sex, but gay sex, you cannot do this. And I'm like, interesting. And this idea of being human and being who you are and all of these natural urges and desires, somehow some types of sexual contact is okay and other types are not. So if anything, right now, I feel like the world is using sex and the way you engage in it as a meter of how spiritual you are. And I think that's the thing. If we recognize a spiritual leader is having sex with their students, or is having anonymous sex, or lots of sex, or pedophilia, or all of these things that they might have a desire and think, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. This is just the human body doing what it likes to do. We would go, oh, and you're spiritual? So for me right now, I feel like it's not possible. However, I would like to start to change that and that idea and that dynamic. And I'll say, I mean, I don't know for the two of you, but I know when I was on my teacher training in India, we were asked to abstain from sex with other people and masturbation, partially because we're wanting to keep our physical activity to a minimum. We're trying not to excite the physiology, and obviously participating in a relationship that way would be the opposite. But also this whole idea about like transmutation of that sexual energy, letting it rise up to you and expanding your awareness and your consciousness and all this stuff. I'm always like, what is this thing with sex and religion and spirituality? Or to think that, you know, if we were ever to talk about Jesus Christ being a sexual person and this person being born of the Virgin Mary, the fact that he couldn't have been born from the relationship of how all human beings are born sexually, like there's already this thing that somehow sex is dirty, it's taboo, it is somehow, I don't know, you are a lesser person if you cannot kind of relinquish that. And so I just read, you know, autobiography of a yogi, and this theme is in there too. And I'm like, it always pops up. It's always, sex is always popping up in these spiritual leadership, thought-filled ideas. And so for me right now, and I wonder, I'm like, I think if we learned that some spiritual leaders that we think do not engage in sexual activity because they chose to renounce it or they were asked to, and then we find out that they actually did, would we think differently of them? Somehow they're less spiritual because you're doing this. You know, and think of the terms we give it, the nasty. You know, you're doing the dirty. These kinds of terms that we give this thing. And in America, you know, there's so, you know, we're an over-sexualized society that acts as though, you know, we shouldn't be doing it. And I'm conflicted, even for myself, because my own sexuality and my spiritual path that I'm on, and like, oh, are you gonna stop being a sexual being? Because if anything, my path has opened. I'm much more interested in sex now than I ever have been. You know what I mean? I'm like, ooh, I don't feel like it's bad at all. I want to experience it as much as I can. And that's why I'm actually not considering myself as being a spiritual or spiritual leader, because I don't want to put this label on myself so then I can't be a person that I want to be. And I'm okay with that. But I do think there is this, I can't think of anybody right now who is very sexually active that we look at as a high spiritual leader. So I do think it's separate for right now. But I'm going to change that.
You know, I think often what happens is that a spiritual leader, either by design or accident, becomes the leader. They become the guru. Nobody sets off saying, I'm going to be a guru. It's the students who call you a guru. They make you into a guru. You can't be a self-proclaimed guru without having other people nominating you. You can't be a teacher unless you have students. You can't be a guru unless people are actually calling you a guru. Just because you say you're a guru doesn't mean you are one. And so I think what you're kind of touching on is hypocrisy. That there are people who claim to be pure as the driven snow, that they don't touch anybody, that sexual relationships with others, and particularly students, is completely forbidden. And then there's a revelation. Then it all comes out. It was actually happening. And if you're being compassionate, you would say, well, this was a human urge that was met. And we all have those urges, and that's completely natural. But if you set yourself up to be a paragon of virtue, to be an exemplar, to be an example to everybody, that this is how you should live your life, but actually behind the scenes you're not even doing anything that you're proclaiming to your students, then that hypocrisy inevitably diminishes your standing. It sort of punctures you. And I think it's extremely hard to recover from that.
But do you
I think going back to the point that Rory was talking about of being householders and monks, if you I'm convinced, I know that you can be spiritual and have a sexual, be sexually active, but the minute you start saying I've given it up, and this is the way to go, and if you want to follow me, you've got to do the same thing. Again, abuse of power or fear administration. Then you are setting yourself up for a fall if you waver.
But do you think the guru status that someone gets to from their students could happen with a hypersexually active person?
I believe that's possible. Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think, again, it makes them more relatable.
Yeah, as long as you're not pretending to be something else and not worrying about the spiritual leader part, just do your thing.
Cool.
But also we need to
you're not
really
putting
define
yourself in a bucket with other. You don't want to say, right, it's me, the Dalai Lama, and Jesus. We're all on this pedestal here. Is that okay?
Right. No, I say it because that's the other thing. I've always struggled with this. Okay, guys, no sex. You're going to be learning these things. Don't be having sex. And masturbation, no. You don't want. And I'm like, really? So I think taking both of your advice is like, and I'm not like hypersexually active, but if that were to change, and I might be coming more and more, I wouldn't want to hide it, and I like you said, I wouldn't care that if I don't appear more holy or more spiritual, then I won't rise to the level of being a spiritual leader, because I don't care about that. I'm not looking to be a spiritual leader, so it might happen to itself. I just don't, what I consider to be the spiritual leaders, I see they all have this celibate, non-sexual attitude and example of behaviors of not engaging in that. You know what I mean? Whether it's hidden or real.
And in Derrick's cult that we were talking about the other week, you can do what you like.
Yeah, I haven't signed up yet. I can't afford it. But I think when we were on teacher training for those 3.5 months, that was kind of part of the deal. I mean, it's like, we were put under a lot of strain, on all sorts of different levels: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, if you like, because it was a test. It was a test. We were being tested in many different ways. Some of those tests were very obvious and public, in the sense that we had to pass certain exams, if you like, or tests. and others were, you know, testing our resolve, testing our mettle, testing our ability to focus. And, you know, that's a good lesson to learn once in a while. And, you know, it's only 3 months, you know. It was like when I went, I said to myself, well, you know, if I'm just open to anything, you know, I'm just prepared to accept whatever it's going to be. And, you know, if there's a bed, that's amazing. And, you know, if it's a bed with sheets on it, fantastic. If they're clean sheets, wow. You know, and it sort of went on like that. You know, I've got a shower, that's great. Hot water, astonishing, you know. And I think, you know, because I just knew that in 3 months' time, I'd be back home and I'd have my clean sheets on my bed and I'd have my hot shower and it'll all be okay. And this is just temporary. And so I think it's testing your attitude, testing your approach. I think the other thing that we have to talk about is, you know, what is spirituality? Okay, have we got another 3 hours? Because, you know, what do we mean by spirituality? And, you know, what is the connection with religion? And, you know, can you be spiritual and not religious? Can you be religious and not spiritual? Et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
Okay, we'll answer that one on a future
I've written
occasion. That'll keep
come out of my meditation to write that one down.
Yeah, that'll keep our audience hopefully hooked for the next episode.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks for sticking around till the end. We hope you found the conversation stimulating and it might have raised some questions of your own. We would like to hear about them. This season, we want to engage with you, our audience, and would love to know what topics and themes would be of interest to you. Also, would you like to be our guest? Perhaps you might be interested in coming on the show and talking with us. We'd love to have you. Please share your thoughts and ideas with us with a direct message on our Instagram account. And for those of you who are not camera shy, please feel free to share a video with the hashtag #TheVedic Conversation. Goodbye.